A FIFA-appointed official made a hand gesture during a World Cup match that anti-discrimination campaigners identified as linked to white supremacist groups. FIFA ran an investigation, and FIFA found nothing wrong. That is the official position. What happened in the weeks that followed tells a different story, and it is a story FIFA has gone out of its way not to explain. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what Shaun Evans did inside that VAR room on the day Germany played Curaçao at the 2026 FIFA World Cup, why the organizations trained to identify hate symbols called FIFA's conclusion not just wrong, but dangerous, and what FIFA quietly changed about the way its VAR officials appear on camera after the investigation concluded, without offering a single reason for that change to the public. Shaun Evans did not stumble into a VAR room at a World Cup. FIFA chose him, cleared him through their accreditation process, ran their background checks, and placed him inside the video review operation at the biggest association football tournament on the planet. The 2026 World Cup, which FIFA spent years describing as the most inclusive and far-reaching tournament in the competition's history, had Shaun Evans as one of its appointed officials. That matters, because what an institution does after one of its own appointees becomes the subject of a discrimination complaint tells you more about that institution than any policy document ever will. On the day Germany took on Curaçao, Evans made a hand gesture that was caught by people whose job it is to watch for exactly that kind of signaling. The specific hand formation appears in documentation published by the Anti-Defamation League as a symbol that white supremacist groups have adopted and deployed deliberately over the past decade. The gesture carries innocent meanings in other contexts, and FIFA leaned on that ambiguity when it shut the case down. But context does not disappear because an institution finds it inconvenient, and the context here was a FIFA official in a FIFA VAR room at a FIFA World Cup, visible to broadcast cameras and to trained anti-discrimination campaigners who saw what happened and immediately filed a formal complaint. What followed was not a social media reaction or an anonymous accusation. Anti-discrimination organizations submitted a formal complaint to FIFA, demanding Evans be removed from the tournament, and that is a meaningful distinction. Formal organizations, formal submission, formal demand, and a formal request that FIFA take a formal action. That is where the story should have gotten serious, and that is where FIFA's response became the story instead. FIFA opened an investigation. 4 words came back. No evidence of disciplinary breach, no named investigator, no independent body referenced, no explanation of what evidence was reviewed, what standard of proof FIFA applied, or what the gesture was specifically tested against, just a conclusion and a closed door. A 4-word exoneration with no supporting reasoning puts you in one of 2 places. Either FIFA looked carefully, brought in external expertise on hate symbol identification, and reached an honest conclusion, in which case explaining the process publicly would have cost them nothing, or the investigation landed where it needed to land, because the alternative, confirming that a FIFA-appointed official at a FIFA World Cup made a gesture associated with white supremacy, was a headline FIFA could not absorb during a tournament it had already spent years defending on every front. FIFA chose silence over transparency, and what you are left with when an institution investigating its own appointee produces a conclusion without reasoning is not an exoneration, it is damage control dressed up as due process. And that is when the story stopped being about one official and one gesture. After the investigation closed, after FIFA announced publicly that no disciplinary breach had occurred, VAR teams at the 2026 World Cup stopped being shown facing cameras. Officials who had previously appeared on broadcast feeds, whose faces and hands were visible to viewers around the world, were no longer filmed that way. FIFA offered no reason for the change, not a technical explanation, not a safety rationale, not a single line of public communication about why the camera arrangement for its VAR officials shifted in the middle of the tournament. What that change accomplishes is not complicated to trace. Without a camera on a VAR official's face and hands, there is no footage of a hand gesture, and without footage, there is no formal complaint. And without a formal complaint, there is no investigation. And without an investigation, FIFA never has to produce another conclusion that satisfies no one. Al Jazeera reported on this. Gazeta Express covered it. The documentation exists. FIFA, running the world's most watched sporting event, has responded to every question about the camera change with nothing. If this kind of coverage matters to you, the kind that stays on the story after FIFA goes quiet, subscribe now and hit the bell, because this channel follows every development, every silence, and every unanswered question from the group stage all the way to the final at MetLife Stadium. None of this is happening in isolation, because the record on racism and FIFA's response to it goes back decades, and it is not a record built on urgency. Fines handed to national federations for racist fan behavior arrived at amounts low enough to function as a running cost of doing business rather than a genuine deterrent. Investigations into coaches and officials ran through internal processes that produced conclusions critics could never scrutinize because the methodology stayed hidden. Tournaments landed in nations where the rights of minority communities face structural limits, and FIFA framed those decisions as dialogue and outreach. That record does not mean the Evans case was handled identically to every past failure. What it means is that the pattern of finding nothing, explaining nothing, and then quietly adjusting the conditions under which things can be seen fits a habit that FIFA has built over a long time. Vinicius Jr. is playing at this World Cup. Over the past 3 years, the Brazilian forward has spoken publicly and specifically about the racial abuse he has faced in stadiums, the investigations into those incidents that went nowhere, and the conviction that association football's governing institutions have not done enough to shield players who look like him. He has been consistent, detailed, and documented in everything he has said. And he is now competing in a tournament where a VAR official was investigated for a gesture linked to white supremacist groups, where FIFA's investigation found no breach, and where FIFA then removed those officials from camera view without telling anyone why. None of that is a metaphor. That is the 2026 FIFA World Cup as it actually exists. The anti-discrimination organizations that filed the initial complaint have continued to push for 3 specific things. A transparent account of how FIFA's investigation ran, naming who led it, what evidence was examined, and what standard was applied. A public explanation for why the camera arrangement changed after the case closed. And an independent review process for discrimination complaints involving FIFA-appointed officials. Because an institution that investigates its own appointees is not conducting an investigation, it is running a risk calculation. FIFA has not engaged with any of those 3 demands. The football at this tournament has been extraordinary, and that is not a concession or a distraction. Goals, moments, the scale of what 48 nations competing across 3 countries actually looks like, all of it is real. None of it disappears because of what surrounds it. But every player on that pitch and every supporter watching from home or from the stands deserves a governing body that meets a racism complaint with the weight it deserves. The gap between what FIFA says it stands for and what FIFA does the moment accountability arrives is where this story lives. And right now, that gap is the exact size of a hand gesture that was investigated, cleared, and then made structurally harder to ever see again. Tell me in the comments which of these 2 things you actually believe. FIFA investigated Shaun Evans and reached the right conclusion, finding no disciplinary breach. Or the camera change, the one with no explanation, already answered the question FIFA said had no answer. One or the other, leave it below, and every comment gets read. Subscribe if you want to follow this tournament beyond the scorelines and the standings, through the governance decisions, the silences, and the things FIFA is hoping disappear before enough people notice. FIFA is counting on the football being good enough that the harder questions stop being asked. They will keep being asked here.